Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for your patience. It is June 26th, 4:03. We'll call this meeting to order. I'll go through roll call of Planning Commission members. Howard Tritz.
Here.
Abby Dahlman. Joey Edwards.
Here.
Lupe Bobadilla. Jamie Seifer. And then Heather Lind here. And then county commissioners, I thought I saw Commissioner Mudge here, no?
Yeah. She just stepped out, she's coming back.
And then Commissioner Marcella?
She said she's gonna try to come, she's got 2 other meetings going on, so she may have to listen and provide some feedback to staff, on Friday.
Okay, and then Commissioner Fiedler. Okay. We have the minutes to approve from June 12th, but I don't know that we have the right people here, so we'll need to table those again, I think. But you can go ahead and give an update on upcoming files.
Sounds great. So July 24th, we're gonna have 2 files for you. We've sent them out to you so you can see all of the submittal documents. Certainly reach out to staff if you have any questions. They have been already posted in the newspaper and sent out to all the referral agencies. But we have a rezone in Colorado Gulch rezone file that suggests they were just part of the backcountry rezoning, and they are looking to rezone back to their original zoning, and are suggesting that being included in the backcountry zoning they felt was a mistake, and so they have put together an application that supports why they feel that a zone change would be appropriate. And then we have a group camp that focuses both on outdoor adventure as well as wellness retreats located at the junction of Highway 82 and 24 South. Sagestone Group Camp is coming our direction, and so both of those will be on the same evening. I know that's kind of 2 big files, but I know we can do it. We've been resting up and we'll be ready to go. So we have tonight's work session to work on future planning, and then we'll have next regular meeting, if everyone is in agreement, would be just to keep the momentum and pace that we are looking at our future growth planning. And but then starting in the end of July, we'll start seeing some development applications. Gateway sketch plan has come in, and the completeness review has been delivered back to them. We did not accept the application due to some outstanding items within their application, and so that has been sent back to them for further consideration. And then Angel View 2 had a meeting with staff today, and we have set them up for a pre-application meeting with the community development team, or we're in the midst of finding a time that we can get good attendance from representatives of the community development team and that work for the development team for Angel View 2. So we are working on that. We are also working with Angel View 1 on the requirements of their preliminary plat. It appears that they have met those conditions, but we are still negotiating the subdivision improvement agreement and waiting. That's been sent to legal for legal review, and so we're waiting on some more pieces before we can move into taking that to the Board of County Commissioners. Final plat doesn't have a public hearing associated with it, but we do take it to the board to provide them so that staff's able to show them how they've met the conditions of preliminary, and that we've reviewed all of the requirements from legal on the SIA. So that is nearing maybe completion, although we still have some steps involved. So short-term rental town hall meeting at Freight last week went well. So we've had both of those engagements. We have heard back, from community builders, but we've not been able to schedule a time yet to sit down and really kind of talk about their technical assistance engagement on short-term rentals, but we're hoping to have that real soon. So, I think that, can you think of any other updates that we have, so I think that's where we're at.
Alright, cool. All right, we'll move down into tonight's work session is future growth planning, and we have some maps to review and just have some general discussion on these and the map layers and such. Bryce, if you want to take us or lead us.
Yes, I should.
Yeah, for sure. As well.
And so I think the other thing that we would just make sure that we are, that staff's bringing forward is that we just wanted to start kind of a discussion so that we can gain knowledge and we can all kind of get on the same page, get really used to using the different layers of the tool, that very informed tool that Bryce has made for us. And so tonight he did a great job, Bryce has done a great job of just kind of so we can walk through together and look at different layers that affect, some critical thinking for all of us on how we move forward. So just kind of where do we start looking at potential for future growth?
Okay. There we go. Okay. So yeah, thank you, Ann. The purpose of this mapping discussion is just to follow up on last week, where we were kind of introducing some of the considerations that we're going to be looking at for future land use planning. The way I kind of want to do this is just more of a guided discussion, and so I didn't create any special layers that are going to point out any identified high density or low density parcels. It's more just an exercise to show everyone else that kind of the high density and low density potential in this county pops up out at you if you, consider all the things we have going on in the county. So this is just our standard parcel development and infrastructure analysis map. And the guide I have, and for those of you that are not here with us, I have a guide that will first start with layers to toggle on to see which lands are not developable. So this is kind of the basis of last meeting. I presented a blackout layer. I'm just going to show you where that blackout layer came from and explain why. So lands that are not developable include parcels with active mining operations. All right, we all know that. This is tough because of the zoom layers. The zoom is just off. But we have Climax up here, Titan AU down here. We have some stuff going on with the slag operation here. And we also have gravel pits. I've heard Webster closed down this year, but it's still not a developable parcel at this time. Federal lands in Lake County. So you toggle that on. And this is all lands owned by Bureau of Reclamation, Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Forest Service, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So just an idea of how much of our county is owned by the federal government. Backcountry zoning. Backcountry zoning, when that was put through, it basically made any backcountry parcel really hard to impossible to subdivide. And so backcountry zoning parcels as a rule are not eligible for development because they're just eligible for that really low intensity single family or backcountry structure that we decided on backcountry zoning. So the orange is further lands that are not eligible for development. And then we have lands under conservation. If I can find it, there's a lot of that. That's why we made the guide. There's a lot of layers on here. Okay. So this is the origin of that blackout map. These are lands that are not owned by private entities, owned by mining companies. They're already under perpetual or existing conservation easement, preventing development. So just really easy to identify, no, nothing can happen on these, or at least we can't even consider them for a subdivision or anything like that. So that's the origin of that blackout layer. You combine all that, it creates one layer that just kind of shows you where development absolutely can happen.
Do you want to pause and just ask questions?
Sure.
If anybody has any questions about any of those, I think we all,
Why?
So that's a good point, Sarah. This discussion is meant to not include and not consider zoning. We're just considering land ownership and
Okay.
infrastructure
What
analysis.
is actually, okay,
Yeah, because we're trying to think creatively, maybe there's some zoning changes that have to be made based on the lay of the land now and what we want future development to look like. I will bring up IM in just a minute though, because there are some special considerations of the IM. But we have layers to toggle on which to see what areas have infrastructure that supports high density. So, as you can see, anything in here that doesn't have a color in it, or that the satellite imagery is going right directly down to, is existing private land that is technically open for development without consideration of any other things. Just because it's private land, not under any sort of protection. If we want to see what can support high density, we have to turn on Parkville, right, our water utility, and our sanitation utility. We're gonna turn on their pipeline networks as well. Well, that just shows you that all that is right around here, centered around the city of Leadville, so we can even zoom in to kind of see how that overlaps. The green lines are sewer lines, the blue lines are water lines. Hard to see, but the purple underneath is the sanitation district, and the teal is Parkville Water District. You know, anything adjacent to the districts or the lines is probably another good thing to consider, that it could potentially be inside the district, or could be serviced by the district at least. And then the other thing to consider is the 3-mile plan buffer. So just a 3-mile plan, we've already done there's a lot of state emphasis on a 3-mile plan for cities and municipalities. This just kind of shows you that within that 3-mile plan, we have all of our major utility infrastructure. All right, but, and we also have a lot of public lands that are not developable, even though they're pretty close to the city of Leadville. So that's kind of what you need to support high density, right? You need water, you need sanitation, and you need proximity to the urban core. And then you want to look at what supports low density. Well, we already have roads and highways. Obviously, you need road and highway access, regardless of where you want to support development. And a tool that opens up potentially low density development in other areas of the county is the OG plan. Now we're starting to see that everything layers up on each other, so that's why I've kind of divided it into groups. But we'll just keep layering on stuff to kind of show. So this shows other areas that are privately owned, that are not under conservation easement or being mined, that are potentially able to be serviced by the augmentation plan. So just a little few tiny areas, you know, around Twin Lakes, around the Edie Hill area. We have, you know, that whole area around Half Moon. And so that's just with the OG plan, right? And then this is where it really gets fun, is environmental concerns. When we start thinking about actual environmental concerns, we have wetlands areas. Okay, now we're starting to see a lot, even like this big Inty Gap is starting to fill up because that's Escondido Flats. I mean, that's got a lot of, that's owned by a water provider for the most part, or the majority of it is, and it's, for the most part, wetlands or riparian area. You have wetland, riparian is just a little bit on top of wetlands, but wetlands is more expansive. And then there's EPA operational units. Right, this is just a consideration. I'm gonna keep this one off though, because most of the EPA operational units that have regulations attached to them are in the industrial mining zone anyways. But one that's really good to consider is OU12, which is the site-wide water quality. So if you take the outline of all the operational units together, that's actually its own operational unit that is focused entirely on site-wide water quality, called OU12.
It's
So-
enclosed in the line, you're showing the boundary.
Yeah, that red line, anything within that red line, basically the entire city of Leadville, a lot of the industrial mining district, and then a lot of the Arkansas River floodplain is covered within that OU12. Good to consider because the state is concerned with water quality coming out of wells in this area if they were to be serviced by water wells. All right, now it's getting really cluttered, but we can start to see that there's some layers on here where everything really starts overlapping and making a lot of sense that, okay, that parcel might be super eligible for development and those parcels might have challenges. There's other layers to toggle on for consideration as we're going through this exercise. You know, we have, there's 2 3-mile plans on here. I did layer a couple of them twice so that you can see them on top of stuff, but we have the airport protection overlay. I put this on here because this is worth considering if we're going to talk about height restrictions or, you know, some sort of visually impactful development. The APO would apply. And then we also have the scenic conservation overlay. That's really the 24 corridor south of town, the 82 corridor, a bit of the 24 corridor heading up through Escondido Flats, and a bit of the 91 corridor as well. And I'm gonna start toggling off some layers so we can actually see the stuff underneath.
Can you put that parcel?
Yes, and that's what we're gonna get to the very top, because it's on top of everything, okay?
Awesome.
But we have to zoom into areas before we do that.
Okay.
There's other layers on here that you might find interesting. Major power lines. BOCC owned parcels to see what the county owns and how it matches up with developable areas. And then Sarah left the room, but I wanted to bring up the industrial mining zone on the east side. Let's toggle off some of this so we can. I should have made that a different color. Kind of hard to see, but better when we zoom in. And this goes along with an environmental hazard that I failed to mention that we do have on here, which is historic mining hazards. All right. So the historic mining hazards, really good to exemplify that there are some areas of East Leadville that we should be careful about, right? But that the IM is industrial mining and zoned as such for good reason. But I wanted to point this out because it looks to me that there might be areas that are within the IM zoning currently that might not have the same level of environmental concerns or hazards that the IM zone in general does. And so, you know, these over here, yeah, there's a few dots, but we've already identified this through our rezone process for Big Owls, that these are actually more like pits that have probably been filled in by now. There's a couple shafts that have been filled in. And then once you get into essentially the Leadville 7 parcel is when we start seeing a little bit more active mining hazards. But we've already done an analysis in this area, you know, for mining hazards. This actually is now rezoned. This parcel is rezoned.
But can you put the parcel map
And
on
then,
it
yeah, we'll
like
put
that?
the
'Cause I
parcels on
think
there, then we got
that's-
everything. Okay. So we have a rezone here, but this area is zoned industrial mining, and as we were discussing through the Big Owls and Animal Shelter rezone, there might be some consideration of changing the zoning just for these areas that, you know, are zoned industrial mining but might not have the same hazards. I think another area to consider, given those same things, is this area kind of closer to the dump. Right? Yes, there might be present mining hazards, but they might be a little bit more easy to mitigate than a crazy concentration like we see up here. Yeah. Not advocating or saying anything, just those are things that I noticed when we're kind of showing all these layers on top of each other that might be considered. So I think that's why I separated it out into 5 different groups, is so you can analyze each one on their own with just those layers. As you can see, there's a lot of layers on here. When you divide them up into 5 different groups, they're manageable. When you put them all together on one, they start getting really cluttered and confusing and not helpful to anything.
Thank you, Bryce. I think that's incredibly beneficial, and I think really starts all of us probably thinking. And I think the first time you see the blackout map, as you referred to it, I think it's quite astonishing. And you know, because I think that we think abstractly often, and so when we actually start identifying, you know, what we're talking about, it gets a lot more specific. And so what we're hoping and making sure that staff is moving forward in a way that resonates with the planning commission and the board is that we would start having these discussions with both the board and planning commission, and that in the hopes of really starting to become very aligned with perspective on future growth planning, and in preparation for going out to a comp plan revision in 2025. Some of us were certainly, I came at the very tail end of the last comp plan process, but we were thinking that there could be value in very much having an internal work in preparation for the comp plan. So both from the land use and future growth, as well as economic development and housing. And so that when we would go into engagement with a consultant on the comp plan, that we would really come into that work very informed with our identity, goals, and priorities pretty straightforward to really inform the work of the growth plan, of the comp plan. And as we would then go out forward-facing in the engagement on the comp plan work. So both as just identifying where we're at, taking inventory, looking at the factors that affect the available developable land in Lake County, and making sure, I think the other part of this scope that we'd like to look from a land use perspective is we'd like to see where our code aligns with things that we identify as areas of high and low density, and where perhaps we have areas that we need to work on in the code. Immediately, perhaps it is some zoning, maybe it's the use table, maybe it's densities within allowable zone districts. I think there could be like a whole array of different areas that we could focus on as we just start into the discussions. But we very much want it to be led by the board and the planning commission, and for staff to learn from suggestions and direction, and that we just want to make sure that we're creating a good collaborative space to make that work meaningful for everybody. So we thought at least tonight we would kind of open up the door to that critical thinking on the different layers and what's affecting property. And so we would love to get some feedback. And the other thing, our transportation planning might be another, like if we have any mass transit corridors, also areas that are bus stop locations for Summit Stage and Eco-Transit, and then any other mass transit plans might be something we want to consider in this as well. Certainly that we would hope would align in that higher density and maybe low density too areas, perhaps in some of our outlying trailer parks, manufactured home communities. So that's one. And so can anybody else think of any other layer or anything that we haven't, that Bryce hasn't identified that might be beneficial?
And one or two things, like I don't know if the map has it, but like is the Parkville map what can be gravity fed or what their current system is?
That is their current district and
Yeah.
their current pipeline network. Yeah.
Because if they know that, or if we could try to figure out that, I think that would be pretty interesting.
We've also talked about that with sanitation district. To see what,
Yeah, because there's some stuff they won't allow lift stations then.
the boundary based on
Yeah.
topography.
And then the other is on the federal ownership layer. I wonder if there's a polite way to ask some of the federal land management agencies, how certain they are of their boundaries. Because I know there's some errors or lack of clarity that, like, I know I ran into that with our own property, like.
This one just stands out to me. The BLM says they own this portion of the IM.
Yeah.
You know, that was.
When isn't BLM, maybe it's this.
Yeah, and then there's a couple of these that I think are,
Is that down 36?
this is BLM.
Yeah.
On 36A, and then there's a Forest Service parcel here along Mountain View essentially.
Yeah.
And then there's a BLM.
And there's random little sprigs in city too.
I mean, I think there are two questions. One is like, do we know if this map is accurate? And these layers are accurate, and then and then I think the next conversation is, yeah, like some of these weird infill parcels, it might be 10 years to resolve, but like, are they ever gonna use those for anything? Is there a way to begin that terrible process of like land? I know.
Well, I'll just say, like, we have a house that has a sliver of land. The house has been there since the 1800s, and there's a sliver of land underneath it that's owned by the BLM. And there is currently zero way to get the BLM to sell land right now.
Yeah.
And I guess it happened with the last presidency, there was BLM can sell no land. So until that is changed, like they can't even start a process for you, so they only do land leases. So like it is something that we can have in our back pocket that like, if that ever changes, maybe, but I don't even know, like barking down the tree right now is.
Yeah, and there's some weird, there's some weird stuff around Crystal Lakes, like that I don't, someone's wrong, like this map is wrong, or the Forest Service and BLM are wrong.
Yeah, I've noticed that too, and there's the state land board,
Like
parcel, but.
Like who owns this if it's not the Forest Service?
That's a good question. I always assumed it was the Forest Service. Yeah.
They can't find their title to it.
Okay. It's a shame, it's going downhill fast, huh? I mean, compared to when I moved here. I know this is the most updated, this is called the BLM SWA layer, and so it's like a surface management layer.
Yeah.
And I made this today, so it's the most accurate information they have, but yeah, like you said, there's some outstanding stuff. If that's not Forest Service, what is it? And I believe that's a Forest Service house as well.
Yeah.
Well, and we have to remember that sometimes this overlay isn't, not that that's what
Yeah,
we're
you can
talking
see-
about, but sometimes it's not in the right spot, yeah.
That's-
And same, the property boundaries are wrong in some of them too, like when you actually go out with a GPS, but it's close.
Pretty
It
close.
gets us to where we,
If you're
can
not on
have
mining
this.
claim, it's really close. If you're on mining claim, double check.
Any questions from anybody online? Don't have the Joey or Howard.
No, it's a good presentation and it makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, and Joey, we'll share a link to this and the document with the kind of the guide to the layers with the planning commission email list.
Any questions from the board or the planning commission about this approach, or, you know, any feedback or anything that you'd like to see included as we start these conversations?
I think for me, I'd like to see us like, see this as like the whole picture, but really dial back on and get to like, just trying to think as far as like, this is a lot and it's a lot of information, and trying to guess what else we may need and or discuss like that may come later. I think it might be helpful if we, and I don't know if we take this and we divide up and we're like, okay, this time we're gonna talk about this section. You know, if we're gonna start by the city and go from there, we're gonna start on one edge of the map and go from there, but it just seems like there's a lot, which is important to have, but it's almost like if you dial in on one section of map and we identify, okay, what do the actual parcels look like, size-wise, shape-wise? What is the infrastructure look like? Then we can really identify that section, what's its current zone district? Is that reasonable for that section? And then move on to the next map section. Because I think if we even try to dial, like hone in on one thing at a time, I just don't know how you're gonna do it with this whole. It feels like a lot with all of these layers instead of just like.
What if we started tonight just with kind of a higher density conversation? If we took, started back at just our parcel and then toggled on the different attributes where we would, and see if we all align with this is kind of where we would see a higher density, and then kind of have some discussion regarding that. Does that sound like a good place to kind of? Or we could certainly start in location-specific discussion too. I think you kind of mentioned both, Heather, so is there one approach or another that would, just for talking points, like not really looking to achieve anything specific tonight, other than to just kind of start this critical thinking piece and just kind of start opening up, getting used to talking about this through as a group. So not really wanting to achieve anything more than maybe just zeroing in, like you said, on one area and just kind of talking through some thoughts, especially with the parcel layers on. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think my idea would be to start on this periphery of Leadville and move outwards from there.
Yeah.
Right, and just start with that 3 mile plan where we kind of know that higher density is not only in our comp plan, it's identified for that area, but it's also supported by the infrastructure.
Right. So can we maybe like toggle off everything and just start at like what we would have on when we're looking at higher density? I would start with the higher density within the 3 mile plan. And
Bryce, when you mentioned 5 groups, were you combining some of these layers to?
Just
eliminate some of the clutter?
these 5 groups of layers to analyze different things.
Is it possible to combine the layers of those? I mean, there's so many variations of color.
Yeah.
If some
Yeah, I
of
think
these
the-
could be grouped to.
The
to
main layer to
simplify.
just have toggled on first is if we all agree with the layers of the non-developable, if that layer is on always when we're in this discussion, then I feel like we can decide from there what layers get added.
so start with it.
Instead of it individually, just do the one that's got all of them.
Okay, let me add that back on real quick.
Before we go on, I've been using the wavy hand, but nobody notices.
Oh, yeah, sorry, when we're
Yeah.
sharing the screen, we can't. see it.
Anyway, Bryce, would you mind going on over to the county land that is owned around the airport?
Mm-hmm.
Good. Thank you.
And so I think everyone knows that this area is being included, well, a portion of this land is part of the lodging feasibility study that is been commissioned by the board so just make sure that everyone, is aware of that. And we've provided, CPD has provided them with some maps in this area. The consultants are looking for information, so we provided them with a better city plan, but we also gave them a map that kind of broadened the area of study potentially based on a conversation with Public Works, the airport, CPD, and Bryce, forgive me, who else?
Sorry.
Oh, you're looking, so, and we just wanted them to consider some of the other area that isn't as challenged like topography. I was talking about the airport industrial park area.
Wait, so the lodging feasibility study is looking at property? Oh, I guess I thought that it was like focused on. Yeah, I didn't know it was.
I think
it was focused on,
opportunity, like where is there actually opportunity to include?
I see,
For so
Space,
sites, so they were,
Which may be in the airport business park.
I see.
Jeff brought up one about Parkville and sanitation's existing network versus, you know, there's also where it could be and where it can't be because of uphill and downhill. Will HOAs lift where sanitation won't?
So we'll have to see if they have those in spatial data form, but yeah, those would be so helpful.
Or it could just be what's uphill from sanitation and downhill from Parkville, as a guess.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like a first, let me just follow contour lines as a first guess, if they don't have that mapped.
Yeah, and I think that's like, yeah, that's probably like down the road anyway on this conversation, because I think it's like, okay, we're looking at the stuff that's closest to the city and expanding out from
Yeah.
there. Then if we identify parcels that were like, oh, it sure would be nice if that was high density, can Parkville get there? It can be one of the questions that we look at more specifically on that parcel than deciding how bad we need that layer upfront.
Yeah, so here's your blackout layer in blue, but just a little bit transparent so you can still kind of get a sense of what's underneath it. But this blackout layer, just for reference, does include all of industrial mining zoning. So those zones that, you know, potentially could be rezoned are included in the not developable for this purpose. So yeah, this eliminates the clutter and shows you around the city what we actually have as far as developable land. And considering that a lot of the prime parcels in here are already neighborhoods. You know, all of these are already neighborhoods. And so you start getting down to
Just a little,
cemetery.
yeah, I was gonna say, maybe a cemetery is something to add as like a non-developable, because I think that's pretty
Set in
solid,
stone.
yeah. And just as like thinking of who might look at this for any potential you know, they might, I mean, they probably won't get very far down the road if there's interested developer, but to see that, those big chunks of land, you know, around the Newmont property too, in Community Field.
and that land has adjusted. I don't know if
Yeah.
if we picked that up yet, that line
Do you
between
have-
No, I
the
haven't seen
cemetery
that.
and the, but they should have recorded that, so it should have gotten picked up in the,
Okay.
Yeah.
I know I saw that they put in barbed wire fencing, so I figured they were readjusting the boundary, but I asked Jonathan if that was to do with forest fire.
they did record the easement and a survey attached to it, so we should be able to get that, and so we can, adjust that.
Because that
boundary
other one
between
is,
the two.
because both of those aren't cemetery land, is what you're saying?
So,
Oh, go ahead.
yeah, the Catholic cemetery has been built into this piece of land owned by Resurrection
Got it.
and for years. So now they finally realized their error and they just put through a lot line adjustment to put this land back into the Catholic Church's ownership, and then they're gonna retain the rest.
So that one just adjusted slightly.
So yeah, we'll add cemeteries to non-developable, thank you, didn't even cross my mind. Oh, and then I think let's add wetlands to this.
And then what about, is the dump in the IM?
It is.
I just couldn't remember, oh, okay, that other little thing is, okay, cool.
I'm thinking about, I think that whole section there, for the landfill is permitted to be the landfill, but I just wonder if we kind of get a verification on that and kind of, I mean, I guess it's already eliminated, but based on the zoning.
We did, that conditional use permit.
2-year plan is.
16, I think, we did a conditional use permit for the landfill. It was already there, but they were doing the expansion, so that's why we had done the new CUP for it.
So, do you have a layer that just blocks off the city? Cause we're
No.
not in charge of those. Sorry, I'm just thinking,
I got it.
cause
This is
then we're only looking at parcels that we can have anything to do with.
Yes. Didn't even think of that, right?
Yeah, because I'm not 100% sure where the city county.
Well, I know they weren't sure for a while about like things like College Park and, yeah, so it'd just be nice to be like,
Yeah,
okay, what have we really determined as who's?
You have the boundary, you can put the city boundary on though, can't you, you've got that?
Yeah, I'm gonna add it as a blackout layer real quick. just
Oh,
to
okay. Pretty
have
cool.
Yeah, I think it makes it, because then if there's like little pieces, they're gonna stick out.
it. Mhm.
17,
Did
we
you
did the
make-
landfill.
All these layers the same color, did you just change that to make them one color?
No, he created a new layer that includes them all,
I'm
right?
adding them on and changing the color to make it one color, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Save that. If I have the layer in the cloud, I can add it during this meeting if I have to create it. But I do have it. This one. Two new. Used it.
If you zoom in, it shows it.
Interesting.
That's because it's.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, because I've made there's a couple things like that, that are
Yeah.
like these little boundary situations. But then I think if you have the parcel map, it confuses those little pieces. Not confuses, but
Mhm.
makes it
Yeah.
not. It's still infill things that we should think about.
And what you said makes sense, like just so you can get your brain around it, like tackling one little bit at a time, so you can sort of actually dig in really into each individual parcel and see what's going on.
Well, because I think then you're talking about all of these technical things like water, sewer, blah, 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 but then you also can start thinking about the neighborhood, what that looks like, and
Yeah.
where do we want this
Yeah.
kind of development versus this kind of development?
Yeah, like,
Where does it make sense to
do we
do
wanna
that?
cluster commercial and industrial away from residential?
Right,
Or, yeah.
Okay, there's Leadville blocked up as well.
cool. Yes.
There you go.
The Parkville,
And then, pardon?
Parkville, and
Okay.
not to include, sorry, in the blackout, but to add.
Yeah,
There yet?
yeah. And then I'm thinking, while we're on this discussion,
Contemplation.
maybe it's worth blacking out the existing neighborhoods. You know, I mean, are we talking about more density in Mountain Pines? Are we,
Right, they're not gonna be able to.
right, so I think like, might be worth blocking out all these major
Subdivisions.
subdivisions, so yeah.
Could be some empty lots in there.
Yeah, but I don't
know if
think
that would
that's,
be
they can't be
developed.
further subdivided.
We
Is that
can't,
based
yeah,
on the zoning or the?
That's true,
Covenants,
that's
or-
best on, that it's, I mean, they are approved plats. And so you'd have to do a plat amendment, and so it is based on zoning too, but you would,
plat amendments, it's water rights, it's all the things.
and it would, and right, it would be very hard to redevelop out. You'd also, potentially, if you wanted to do something different than the zoning, then that's spot zoning inside of a subdivision, so I think you'd be safe taking the subdivisions out.
I think so, okay. Cause I thought that would be an interesting conversation to see, yeah, how you can further
What's vacant?
split.
This actually is really, look at that.
I think the tough thing that I would see with something like that is convincing the landowners that bought into a subdivision that was platted, that now all of a sudden you're changing
Right,
their subdivision. and-
right. I would think it would have to be like a full neighborhood conversation,
Yeah, and it would
if
have,
we even
Yeah,
got to that.
in that plat amendment thing, I mean, almost all of those are more than 50%
We're
built
not talking
out, that like, I don't know,
and you'd
if it
also
would
have
ever
to
be worth
But
the
it's on,
legalities of doing that
consider
for a couple lots.
water unless you were,
Water's the big one
and
also.
unless you were offering odd plan.
And
But
So I mean, this is really, just off the top of my head, I can see, once we black out the cemetery, there is no more land inside no more developable land inside.
Can you zoom in on that?
Yep.
Cause
So-
I swore that,
inside sand district.
The purple is Sand District
Oh.
and the light green is Parkville.
oh, in the sand district, I thought the purple was the cemetery.
No, but
I
this
see.
entire parcel is, so that's it, I mean, besides just a few
Well,
outlying
like,
parcels over here.
There's a big parcel that Bill Corn owns, right?
This.
Yeah.
Mhm. Right, but it's technically cemetery, so he's not allowed to develop it, even though it's owned privately, as far as I've heard. The
That's what I
Evergreen,
understand.
He
the
doesn't
Evergreen
have that
Cemetery extends
constitutional-
into these parcels.
Oh, interesting.
And I think
don't,
there's also buried decedents there that it would take a lot of,
my understanding is he has
Exploration.
40 acres there that is
Mhm.
not part of the cemetery. At least that's what he understands, that can be developed.
He understands it, that he's part of the cemetery when it comes to taxation.
Interesting. That's interesting, I'm gonna have to ask him about that. Okay. Darn it, I was like hoping that was gonna be a good parcel for somebody to.
Mhm.
now, saying that though, and I think, again, like, there's such a lack maybe of mapping of what or who would exist there and who may be buried in those areas. But it might be that the northern part of that, diocese lot on the, like, is actually mapped and they know that that's vacant. It might, and they have a housing program, like they build and develop, and so that, I mean, it would be interesting to reach out. Oh, Jackie's not here.
I did reach out to the diocese.
Did you?
Yeah. But I did it through John Cirillo, who went through Colorado Springs, diocese. And because I had thought that was a great site to partner on land for, but I'm not there. The one, because I don't think the diocese owns Evergreen, I think they own the Catholic cemetery, right? So
Yeah, but it's shown as,
that one's diocese too?
yeah, but that's also like the Elks New Ground in there, so I don't
Yeah.
know.
So, but I reached out to them about the, because of Resurrection and their proximity to, the other area, and because they have a whole, housing, like you said,
Okay.
and I got back that they weren't interested at this time. But that could change, but did reach out through John Cirillo when they were looking at, and Resurrection, when that conversation came in about the lot line adjustment. Because they said possibly they would subdivide, the property to the west. Yeah, and so I said, wow, that seems like a great housing site. If we could get, an easement for access. And, at that point, they didn't show an interest, but maybe that would change. But I did initiate some conversations just to inquire, because they were looking to potentially, maybe liquidate that or subdivide, and so, at least started a conversation, but got back after really pushing that they weren't, going to entertain that conversation now, but maybe if it was a board directed, inquiry, then maybe they would, be more apt to
Yeah,
maybe
maybe.
show some,
There's a sewer line going into Mountain Gate.
yeah.
Or a water line rather, and a sewer line coming down oftentimes.
Well, they have a
Yeah.
sewer line in there too.
I was really excited about the possibility of subdividing that, but I didn't get, the
Didn't get that
diocese
idea.
didn't seem to be overly interested, but now that there's a regional housing authority, maybe there is a benefit to working together. So I wouldn't give up on that, but we did reach out initially for
Several years
conversation.
ago, Bud Elliott mentioned that the diocese owned something like 13 properties. Is that worth a layer? Assuming we knew where they were.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a quick query.
Well, I don't know that it takes them out of
No,
possibility, so I don't know that we want them separated out. Because,
I think it puts them into possibilities.
yeah, but everything that's not layered is our possibilities. And so I feel like
Do
it
you wanna teach
confuses
us how
it.
to filter real quick?
Filter for,
For names of ownership? Can we do that?
not through the map, but you can do that through the assessor records.
Okay,
And then
okay,
link back to the map essentially.
got it.
so, I didn't know the diocese owned that many properties.
So we can't, like down there, the arrow, that's that thingy?
Those are the
How do you
layers.
use that?
I've never used that.
Oh, okay.
That's your
I've played-
attribute tables.
I
Wow.
played around with it and used it successfully by accident a couple times.
Well, you just taught me something new.
But,
I've been playing around on this for 7 years and didn't know it. Never clicked that arrow.
well, maybe that's a way to, are those all your terms?
These are straight from the assessor database. So
Yes,
when we
they're-
pull these from the assessor database and link them to the map, this is the fields we get from there. Where's owners? I don't see.
Oh, no, I saw name, I thought her name was
It's gonna be name.
Yeah, there's name, yeah.
Is, what do you know what the?
Archdiocese, I think it's the Archdiocese of Colorado Springs. Okay. Maybe it's,
Well, maybe
it's
we
Catholic
figure out that out a little bit better,
Yeah.
and then we can do a little 101 on how to like query some things. Sorry, I can't be helpful, I've only, like I said, used it successfully a handful of times, and not enough to remember what I did by accident correctly.
I'm trying Catholic, it's not Catholic.
You can also do contains diocese. I assume there's not that many dioceses that own land up here, and I've got,
Oh, yeah, so, cause it probably, yeah, it might, you might have to do the full exact name.
otherwise. What do you just do contain?
Or I think you might want,
Is, you're right, it's diocese, not archdiocese.
yeah,
It's diocese, okay. You do? For the West Second,
We're gonna have to figure out how this thing works.
500 West Second,
It's all over
609
the city.
Poplar.
Yeah, so if you go to options. in your
I'm
filter,
seeing 1, 2,
And then
3, 4,
you
5,
do
6,
contains, you see
7.
where it says is? Just do contains
Oh,
and then
yeah.
type in diocese.
Oh,
So the Catholic Cemetery, 407 West Second, 424 West Second, 500 West Second, 609 Poplar, and
5
607.
features. Thank you,
So
Jen.
the two churches,
Yeah, so it's all in the city other than the
it's the two,
cemetery.
it's Annunciation Church, it's St. Joseph's Church, and it's the cemetery. Right? Yeah, so it's just the churches and the cemetery, right? At least for the Diocese of Colorado Springs is
I had the impression from Bud's comment that people had died and left the property to the church.
So, no, I don't know. Those are the only ones I see with the Diocese of Colorado Springs, Annunciation, St. Joseph's, and Cemetery.
Well, I guess again, to me, it's like if there's property out there, it doesn't I mean, the only ones we care about blocking off or
Right.
layering out are layers that we know they can't develop, future develop.
Exactly.
I don't know that ownership,
They'd be included anyway,
yeah, so
regardless.
I don't know that we need to go down that.
And search two is really weird. It also changes its answers based on how zoomed in you are. So if you're not visibly seeing a parcel with how zoomed in you are, it won't populate down below. Like if you zoomed in on just the cemetery, it would only show you one.
Now it says 9 features, you know? Well, this is why I just go to the assessor records and search diocese.
Yeah, that's what I did.
But yeah, we don't need to, like I said, I don't know that that's
Really,
I think we're spending a lot of time on something that we don't need to.
ownership.
Yeah.
You had said, I think that you did a layer, or we're looking at, where there was literally nothing on the land, right? It was vacant and it wasn't already developed?
Greenfield
Is that-
parcels,
Oh, okay.
yes,
'Cause
it's
I
not
ju-
on that assumption, I think where I put it. But yes, I do have that one, where it was basically just parcels that aren't IM, aren't backcountry, that don't already have improvements as well. And that improvement could be anything that the assessor values besides land. So it's not a perfect tool, but it does show you what parcels already have homes on them, basically.
And conversely, which ones are vacant land?
Cause say we look strictly at the 3-mile plan, which might just be a mile in radius, right? Like,
Yeah.
and we're trying to really think about incentivizing and focusing and density in that area. If you're not gonna convince, or if existing subdivisions aren't going to change plats, there's large landowners, but if they have homes and plans, like, that's a huge lift and not likely to, like, say, what do you wanna do with your 60 acres? How about letting us put housing on it?
Well, yeah, it may not be the tool that we're using today to identify what can be developed tomorrow, but I think as far as our comp plan and our master plan goes and our zoning goes,
Right,
I think it absolutely is exactly what you need.
the 3-mile.
I think you do want, I do think you wanna consider those parcels heavily
Yeah,
that have a house on them
Cause there
already.
might still be some slivers of them.
Well, because I think that like Jack built on his, but he also wanted to subdivide it before, and I think there are plenty of people out there that like, I mean, everything's for sale. So
Yeah.
if somebody offered somebody, or somebody's listed their house on their 40 acres tomorrow, a developer would consider it. So I think our zoning conversation and our master plan and our master future growth plan needs to consider that that's a
Yeah.
possibility. I think then when you get away from this conversation of like the big picture plan and you have this housing group looking at potential properties, maybe that's not the first one on their list. But as far as the purposes of us deciding future growth plan,
I absolutely agree. I mean, it's
Yeah.
the same way in that you're incentivizing people to do conservation and whatever those tax credits are.
mhm.
What, on the other hand,
Yeah.
can we develop incentive programs to
Yeah,
change? Yeah,
because I think that if you layered out anything on County Road 4 with big land, anybody who has a house on it, I think you'd layer out almost all of them.
yeah, and I guess I stopped, and that's just a good point in the whole conversation. Like, to be very particular with what we're, because I wasn't suggesting to add it as a layer, that's not an option, but, yeah, I think we just need to be careful about, well, what are, what
Mhm.
potential are we talking about? Building new, building up, Or are we talking about, yeah, just this future land use vision and mapping for comp planning? So, because and I think it's worth saying that multiple times in the same conversation, so that we can keep those ideas separate in our heads.
Yeah,
A
because
lot
I
of us
think
are so,
like if we're
wrapped in-
looking at it from like the zoning lens perspective for the future growth plan and master plan, I guess where I was hoping to have this as our tool is that we already have this general vision for it. Like, we've already identified that this is a great area for high density, and this is what kind of high density we're talking about there. The zoning aligns with that, and therefore it kind of forces that to be exactly how that plays out in the future, whether it's today or in 10 years. But if we really start to like focus down too deep, then I think we're talking about a today plan and not a long-term plan. And I think I was thinking more long-term plan initially.
I mean, to me, that long-term plan makes sense, especially for like the planning commission. I could see like an EDC meeting that's different.
Yeah, well, and it could be that then turns into the more focused plans, but I feel like right now, I feel like our zone districts have been in place for so long and they've worked out okay, but, you know, there's been a couple of subdivision applications where we had just tremendous community opposition, but it matched the zoning code. And I just don't know that it matches who we are today, and so I really think we need the tools to make sure that our zoning code represents what we think the community wants right now, and in the next 10 years, you know, like, okay, in this general sense, if we've really identified this little pocket to be really great for we have hardly any multifamily zone districts right now. And I know we're not going down the zone district hole, but we don't have that.
We don't have that.
And if we started identifying this is where we really see those happening, and we talked about that zone district or changing this current zone district to allow for, you know, there's just so many conversations there that then incentivize and let whoever comes to town know exactly what it is we want, whereas right now, they're like, oh, well, it seems like this is what they want because it fits in their zoning code.
Yeah.
And then they bring it forward and we're like, no. Or, you know, whatever. So I think that if we could look at this on more of the like general, but also sort of specific sense of like, where could it go? Obviously taking out anything that's not developable anytime soon, which would be cemeteries and BLM land and all the other stuff he took out, I think then, and I think subdivisions.
And subdivision.
Because sure, is it possible someday I think anything's possible, same BLM or rezoning some of the national forest stuff, but all of it's so not likely that I think we could take them out for now. And then I think we'd have enough little pieces that we could look at this map right outside the city there and say, okay, this parcel, who kind of owns it? What do we think topography? What do we think road-wise, utility-wise makes the most sense there? Because like, if you go to the south side of Leadville there, where the sand district extends and then where it also doesn't, we gotta think about like, that's that hillside, so like, what's reasonable?
Right here?
I was kind of thinking a little bit more, yeah, over in there and up from it,
Yeah.
but they don't show where, oh, College Park is over there,
College Park's right here.
yeah, okay. So a lot of that's CMC.
Yes, this is, all these parcels are CMC.
Mhm. So yeah, so it'll help to like sit down and do that too, and be like, okay, well,
Right, because that's another.
there's potential that maybe they could be like, here's some housing that we would do or whatever, but that again, to me, is more of a housing conversation than a, what's our zone district?
Yeah. I
future.
think if we do all this analysis and then the greenfield analysis on top, like what parcels don't have anything on them, it's gonna be like two handfuls within this area that are really apparent, like, oh yeah, turns out this one's great for a subdivision. Well, it turns out it's already being planned on being a subdivision by someone.
Yeah.
You know, it's,
Yeah.
what Dan said, all the good land's already taken and built on.
Mm.
So it's creative now.
But I think that helps also, though, adjust the perspective accordingly, because I think what I was hoping this would do is get everybody on that same perspective chain of like, Leadville looks like it has a ton of land to develop, so everybody kind of just thinks there is. And if the perspective shifts to, no, it's limited, therefore we should be being very careful with what we're putting where and how we're doing it. And I don't know that that's necessarily what has happened. Not that I feel like there's anything super terrible, but I think it's important to realize, okay, well, if we do that, does that leave enough commercial? Does that leave enough this leftover zone? And, you know, and I think really identifying that we should treat each section that we do have left really, really carefully, I think is, to me, the perspective I wanted to try to get everybody on board with.
I think you just gave the vision statement.
I also want to just everybody to consider the amplifier or the game changer in kind of what historically has happened too, as far as growth vanity is the augmentation plan. That's gonna bring in an opportunity that has kind of for whatever reason, self-regulated lower densities in anywhere served by wells. So unless you're talking subdivision, you know, somebody, a developer that's going to spend the money and invest in going through a water augmentation plan of their own. So when you throw on the augmentation layer, the Lake County augmentation plan, you know, that'll be, and I'm getting a little further away from what you're talking about, but just as we're talking about, you just consider what a change that would have when you look at water could come in and increase the ability to further develop these properties in a way that's never been able to be done before because of the limitations of water. So it does add a whole, you know, another layer on there.
Well, and I would say too, around, but anywhere like in this area, if we're gonna talk and encourage higher density, how do we make them attached to Parkville? And if and when Parkville adds storage up in Iowa Gulch, what does that mean to a whole different area that they could serve? I think that my initial thought is like augmenting anything in here is a waste of the augmentation plan. And we wanna figure out programs or ways to get people on Parkville. And also California Gulch and the OU 12, CDPHE in the state has requested that like no more wells, to the best of our ability, no more wells actually get put in California Gulch. And so that's kind of another way to.
So, but I think I was thinking kind of out of that, like kind of area that we already identify as, you know, where we would seek higher density, and there is potential for expansion of centralized utilities. You know, it increases the developable aspect to maybe areas that we would want to see lower densities. And so that's just something to consider.
Well, and I think some of the layers are on here. It wasn't, I mean, I think like today we were looking at like more of the high density
Yeah, I'm
direction.
sorry,
But no, but I think that's the flip side, right? It's like, it's not exactly the 3 mile circle, because that's like the wrong distance for our size community, but.
Right,
like,
but that periphery
but,
kind of idea, yeah.
You know, we have the scenic conservation overlay and we have some other areas, but to me, there's probably some, like that layer of subdividable land, if that was the word. Like it'd be worth, the flip side of where we've been so far today of like, where's subdividable, where we're like, all of us would be like, ooh, I don't know about that.
right? And you gotta think that's what the Og plan opens up. is
Yeah,
typically to subdivide.
Yeah,
And
So,
so, yeah, all these in orange are kind of identified parcels that would be inside the Og plan. And also eligible. to
wait, there's so much dark, where
Sorry, it's hard to see because of the parcel lines, but the orange.
Right, but that's like if you kept that zone district the same and met those exact same lot
Yeah.
requirements, density requirements, so I feel like that's a whole nother, that's,
Yeah, that's
Judy.
another discussion, but yep,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
So,
No, but I think we should be having that too, like in the
Yeah.
same time frame as the augmentation plan implementation, right? So, I mean, again, exactly your point, like,
To encourage higher density in those areas?
no,
Or
to
any-
just consider it, just consider what, in managing the odd plan, what that would mean in more rural areas, so.
because currently they all only have permission for one well for all of those little parcels that are under 35 acres.
And
So the
some-
Og plan would allow for maybe that to be split into 2 5-acre parcels.
Right, right, and a lot of that is, rec, and so minimum lot size is 3 acres, and so that opens up a lot of new abilities to subdivide in those areas.
Yeah, and this is just major subdivision, so this is 5 parcels or more can be carved out of these existing parcels. This isn't even considering
Minor.
Smaller stuff, yeah.
yeah, and I think the hard discussion is like, some of those areas is like, okay, like, yeah, if we need more housing, like, maybe it's okay for that, like, what would feel like drastic subdivision to start happening, and it can be supported by the augmentation plan, and that's okay, or, no, that's, like, the road can't handle it, or
Septic system.
wildfire risk, or scenic conservation values, or whatever, whatever it is, like,
Well, another thing to consider is the Og plan also opens up the potential for ADUs, which
right,
aren't allowed under current wells, so.
So, yeah, it just, I guess, on the flip side of density, odd plan has the ability to consider higher densities in areas that we kind of say are outside
yeah,
of that, where we'd want to see higher density. So just thinking that through,
Yeah.
because it would open up ADUs, minor subdivisions, in those areas.
Yeah. The recreational, I can tell you, that being the name of the zone district is very confusing for.
Yeah, we definitely need,
I mean, we could change lots of the names of them.
Right, it's just like, the way that's developed is a very residential type zone district. But when you see recreational, people think, oh, well,
yeah,
of course they wouldn't mind my campground next to that.
well, it's moderate density rule, but, yes, we are forever, saying your zoning's recreational, but. So, it's really a rural residential zoning, so,
Well, same with our agricultural.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, our titles for zone districts are not great, but, sorry, I think I feel like I took the conversation away from kind of zoning in on that, higher density, a priority conversation, if you wanna go back to the.
I also feel like you said, I mean, I think you guys work with Public Works so often, you understand what is the actual imposition on the
Strain on services.
strain on the services, but it'd be really great to look at certain areas and, say whether or not with the topography and the snow load and the this and that, like what could actually work or not, or what in my head then might trigger like us requiring some funding mechanism to add resources to maintain that area if you're going to,
Demand
and I
services.
wonder, yeah, like in that area down in E Hill or something, if that really does, I mean, I just.
So, yeah, Ehe Hill area or anything, that is, part of the O'Neill estate that went through probate court and plats were created by court versus going through subdivision process. So topography, geology,
Maybe that's a
everything was
legislative
not
thing. Can we
considered.
visit that legislatively and be like, we don't just have to deal with that, we have to manage?
Or make them not eligible, so the only, so the decision was made long before me to recognize those as legal parcels, and so the Division of Water Resources, by the time we came along, they said, well, Lake County has always recognized those court plats, and we'll go according to whatever you say. And so my predecessor said, well, if that is how it's been, and we've got a precedent, then we'll continue that precedent. And so that's why we've always, but the division didn't come in and make that determination that they would allow exempt in-house use wells there. That had been something that Lake County at some point said, we're going to recognize these court-created parcels as legal parcels, and there probably is a good legal standing for that, since the court made those decisions. I think it's just recognizing that when that happens, the same care that, even though what we're doing today wasn't put into dividing up that land, so that's, and then we're left with all of those situations, just like you said, Sarah, that, the roads may not make sense, the access may not make sense. There may be topographical challenges that were never investigated or thoroughly thought through. And so then when a decision would be brought before you to give further entitlement on that, it could be a bit of a slippery slope, or perhaps the burden really comes on that next owner that has to go through a well-vetted subdivision process. So potentially, maybe they could be worked out, but things like that wouldn't go through a review like an ADU, that a subdivision review might open an opportunity to make these land divisions better than they were by court order. But something like additional density based on ADUs or something like that, conditional use permit, or use by right that increases density may not look to vet that quite in the same in-depth review kind of idea. But certainly, can we map those now? The O'Neill Estate properties.
Probably.
Those are always, right, anyway, so there's all kinds of issues with those right now.
I do think that's worth considering doing though, because they're kind of their own animal, they have their own set of considerations.
Yeah, I mean, it almost could be its own little zone of like, hey, there aren't roads and there aren't
Yeah, I mean, they're really kind of a legacy that got left, and unique, very unique, and really kind of outside of any traditional zoning idea. For instance, all the rural multifamily, which to me is an oxymoron to begin with, but the reasons that we did previously. So anyway, that was born out of that whole Quail Mountain idea. So that's a tangent. I'm so sorry. Took you guys off treasure here for a minute. Sorry about that.
I also wonder, Heather made a point earlier, which I think is what we all from like staff to decision makers are challenged by with any application is, I think this conversation not only is like what we want to see and what can happen, because I think that can be vague enough, yet based on all of these layers and actual conditions in areas. But I hope that this conversation will give us the information and the confidence to try to be very deliberate in what we permit in the limited areas left.
Mhm.
And give us the confidence to exercise our tools.
Well, we just have to have it in the
And
code,
maximize
right?
that.
And
Yeah.
so I think that's it, that's where, I don't know if you remember years ago, we went to some planning and zoning thing. I don't know, they had that, is that form? No,
Form-based, maybe?
is it the one where you like
Oh.
get scored? You get
Yeah.
scores for
Yeah.
each time you wanna develop a piece of property, like depending on where it is, it's all, and then there's not really spot zoning, it's all like,
It's
just you can do this because it's, happens to fit in this area and has this walkability score and has this score for this, and it's really cool, but not something that
Breckenridge
Just right now,
has, Breckenridge has that kind of point system, form-based zoning. Which, yes, you know, you get points for this, and points taken away for this, and so, and you have to
You have to get so
hit
many points to
to
do
be
whatever
able
it
to
is
be
you're trying.
eligible, yeah. So it's a form-based point system, to look at that, and so we have Euclidean zoning. That's the basis of our zoning type, and the other form-based, I know Poncha Springs. If you'll remember when we went to the housing work and
They did it just in a little section of.
They did just form-based in one little area in Poncha. And then Breckenridge has point system, and yeah, so.
Yeah, it'd be my dream zoning code, but it'd be quite the undertaking.
It would be quite the undertaking. I mean, it would be dependent on a decision and having the funding to bring in consultants to go through that whole switchover process. But it would be something that we'd have to consider, or get more intentional with your existing zoning and make sure that it aligns. And so I think that's the other thing, is to look at, I think right now we didn't want to look at zoning too much, just kind of identify what's happening and what makes sense. And you just look at the land and ownership and all of the features affecting it, then we had hoped like the next step would be, okay, so then let's consider zoning, and where does it make sense and where doesn't it, and where's our disconnect, and where should we do something codified to make sure that it aligns with, you know, what our intentional desires are.
And I guess I'm wondering if we wanna change that just a little bit,
Okay.
This would just be my thought, is because I think it's too easy to be like, oh, and what about this one section of town, you know? I mean, it's all a good conversation, but as far as trying to keep a focused discussion, it's like, okay, next meeting, everybody do their homework on County Road 4. And it's periphery or whatever, like, what do we see there? Then the next one is Mountain View Drive, and then in between the two or whatever. It's like, because I just think then we will look at zoning, utilities, and what we think, because I'm just wondering if then we have, and we don't have to necessarily do much ahead of time. I think that if we just said next meeting, we're talking about County Road 4, and we're not gonna come back to County Road 4 for a long time, so if you care about County Road 4, you should come and talk about County Road 4, you know, like, just so somebody doesn't bring you back to County Road 4 next time, but.
Yep, and so I think that we should make a plan of where those, you know, intentional, what areas, like kind of a sub-plan of different areas that we're gonna look at, and then we can.
Well, I guess I'm thinking, like, if you're gonna block out, these subdivisions already, and assume those no, and assume the cemetery no, and if this sanitation layer is off, and we toggle them on when we want to, then it's easy to be like, okay, let's take these properties here. Everybody kind of like, and then the discussion is, okay, what do we think about here? What do we know about this parcel? What kind of access does it have? And then we'll move. I feel like in one meeting, we're gonna get through kind of all of these and kind of decide what's its current zoning, what's allowed there, what could somebody do there that we don't want, what could somebody do there that we do want, you know, and kind of just like, because if you knock off these subdivisions, you don't have very many between here and Mountain View. And we just start there, and then the next conversation is here, you know, and then the next one is whatever, but it just seems like this is a good place to start, because there are some good big chunks that were Mountain View, but there's some good chunks here that are mostly gonna be beneficial for residential use, so that'll help us like just focus on that at first. And really identify utilities, because they go to here.
But what would we do that for, incentivizing higher density use that doesn't exist already, or changing the zoning?
Yeah,
Or
see, and I
looking
think
at the
that's where,
existing
I guess we maybe need to all get on the same page of like, what our goal in this whole activity is. I don't know that it's like for a specific high density, we're looking for high density developers. My thought is it's identifying what the zoning is currently there. If we think this parcel is suitable for high density use, but this is not suitable for high density, then are they zoned accurately for that?
That makes sense to me. It's like, yeah, where there's a zoning disconnect from what our sort of wish list comes
Right,
up with.
like, somebody could put in this commercial thing here, do we want to keep allowing that to happen? I mean, that's not necessarily true, but, you know, and so I think it's identifying the zoning in those and understanding that if they are developable and they would be great for a high density subdivision, do we have all the incentives in place in our zoning code to support that as well as infrastructure? But like, maybe we don't want this piece to be high density, and we identify that as like, oh, there's like all this river stuff over there, there's all this other things. This really should be low density, if anything, but does zoning portray that?
Yeah.
And I just think we're going through and looking at, I guess, I wanna be looking at all the zone districts, not just looking for subdividable properties.
Does it change it a little bit to do an assessment of what our table of uses say each zone can do, and then matching? I think I'm saying the same thing, maybe in a different way, like make sure that the zone.
I think that'd be part of the process.
What if, so almost everything that you're looking at, can you throw on zoning real quick? Is everything, the majority of what we're looking at is either recreational or urban residential, right?
But-
Right, and I'm just wanting to look for a minute.
But sorry, but just to finish that thought, I mean, it's like there's a rezoning tool and there's a changing the table of use tool, right? Right, I think that's what you were saying.
And then there's a changing the lot size, changing the density requirements, and so
Yeah.
that's, I guess, what I'm trying to say, is I think first, you're saying, in a really pretty world, we think this parcel should be this.
Mhm.
Now, let's look at the use table and see what's
Is
currently
that
allowed there,
possible?
what's not allowed there, what does the density standards require, and then make sure it matches up,
Yeah.
and
So,
kind of be
that-
making a list.
so if the code or zoning or use table like doesn't allow the pretty picture vision, then we can think about changing that. And if it does, and the pretty thing's not happening, we can work on incentives, whether it's through the EDC or housing policy or whatever it is.
Our goal so what is our goal in, incentivizing in housing, so our use, so the use that we are specifically looking at is residential or commercial, or
I
what
think
is?
both.
I'm looking at any potential use.
Okay, so any uses, and again, but I like the idea of taking this section by section.
I picked 10 or 4 because I think that's mostly residential, but I guess to clarify, let's say we're talking about this piece over by Safeway and up behind there. That piece is something that I think that conversation is gonna be, well, that could be really good commercial development there, that could be residential development there. Do we want all of those things there? How is it zoned currently? What's currently allowed? What could somebody bring us? And I know that we're not gonna individually zone each of these, but as we're having the conversations here, we're gonna start getting used to what this zone district allows. We're gonna almost have the table of uses figured out in our brain as far as when it comes to, I think, a lot of this stuff. But I do think there's parcels where there's gonna be questions, like, should there be open space? Because there's not open space near there. Should there be commercial development? Should there be, and so I think this is just, to me, a good, easy starting one, because the most likely development in here is residential, so it just starts us all thinking the same and going down one path of likely residential use. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
That's a good vision for where this is going to end up. For now, maybe we get Bryce to outline what's on Highway 4, what's on Mountain View, so nothing gets left out. That it's done in an orderly fashion, everybody that's doing their homework knows how far to look. And then on the first pass, just go through and say, developable, not developable, developable, not developable, developable, not developable. And then there's another round where you can come back and say, well, developable how? And then you get into codes and tables and zoning. All those things need to be done. And I like what you're saying. You're envisioning the end result and thinking we're going to get there right away, as near as I can tell.
So yeah, I think it would be good to just have kind of an idea of staging of, like, so if County Road 4 is going to be our target for the next conversation, we could create a map that we can determine. We'll take a stab at how far to extend that, and obviously we'll go adjacent to the existing subdivisions to the south of County Road 4 and adjacent to the subdivisions. And then
Is
we
this-
put on section lines? Can we do it by section?
Yeah, we can do section lines.
Could we agree to do section by sections? Just to give us kind of a.
Or that road, right? Isn't that County Road 36 right there? That divides
County
that
Road
next zone
36,
district?
And then at County
Yeah.
Road 17.
So County
up
Road
above.
4 to County Road 36.
So just everything south or everything adjacent to and south to 36?
Everything south of 4, and then I would say to, because we're gonna do, you wanna do County Road 17, you wanna do Mountain View Drive?
I mean, we can do all the way to Mountain View, and then the next one is above Mountain View.
Okay, so why don't we do
So
36 to 17?
Can I ask again, back to like the idea of looking at specific parcels and land and table of uses for the exercise of us all getting familiar with that versus or like the vague enough intentions of what we might want to better articulate in the comp plan of like, well, we want to see more commercial in these areas as long as you can get into Parkville District and this, then these are kind of the points towards supporting a project like that, but vague enough, because I don't think we're gonna go parcel by parcel to say what we want where. What's your thought, Dan?
So I would just suggest too, that I think that a natural market is going to look for opportunities to rezone and do PUD in places that are identifiable for good, mixed use. So starting off with business is your only mixed use zone district. Everything you only can have a primary use established. Business is the only one in our code currently that has the ability to have more than one use. All your other zone districts are going to make you establish a primary, and then you can have accessory to that. Business is the only one that you could have residential and commercial on. And I would just keep the door open to identifying more where the current zoning isn't giving you a favorable outcome. And remember that you always have the natural market that'll come in and do their own analysis specific to what they want to do. And that PUD tool is always a great tool to be able to come and create a designer zoning specific to, and you have that ability to open up the door and have that amazing negotiation where you can leverage those trade-offs for advantages for the community within that development or impacts specific to that development. So, but maybe there's more tools that you could put in the PUD process to leverage better outcomes, things we haven't thought of, right? That you could put in the code to be really predictable and kind of direct development to those priorities that you find through this exercise. well, let's incentivize them to go PUD in these areas, and here's some way to incentivize it. Also, in exchange for that, the trade-off would be, in this area, we really need to see participation, collaboration in X, Y, and Z. Does that make sense? To just remember that there is that PUD and ways where you want to see those kind of things. Maybe think about building in those trade-offs in the PUD process.
Well, and I guess to clarify too, it's not that I think like those two parcels right next to each other most likely are gonna be something different. I think it gets you on board with envisioning down that road. Like right now, most of it is urban residential, but there's some recreation on that road. And so it's identifying, well, should those parcels in between 17 and 4 be recreational, or could they go urban residential to incentivize a little bit higher density? I don't know, let's have that conversation, but I do think looking at individual parcels is important because we're identifying what parcels even have the space to be developed. But then if there are areas where we would prefer to push them into a PUD where we have more negotiating, then I do think that's another way that you can use your zoning code to offer a more
More of a
the more
carrot.
favorable,
More of a carrot than a stick.
yeah, is to go PUD, so let's send them that way. There.
Right, but immediately, if there could be expansion of utilities, right where you see your yellow urban residential and your gray recreational, you're going from a minimum lot size of 7,500 square feet to 3 acres.
Mhm.
I mean, you immediately hit a huge density change right there, right? So anywhere you are gray to yellow is going to be a significant change. Same with the pink is Adcore Street is 5. If they were kind of the same, but the orange and the further south, pink fuchsia color. Oh, no, red, not fuchsia, yeah. So then you're at 5 acres versus 75. I mean, so like right in that, right there, that's a huge change right there. Does that huge change make sense? Yeah, I those are just my questions to the group, does that really significantly
Gray
make?
zone where it could go either way, and as time develops, narrow it down.
But are those, where you have those big zone changes in density, is that someplace that you could expand? Because upzoning is obviously a lot easier than downzoning. And would that incentivize extension of services
Right.
and, those kind of things? So,
Yeah.
And so I think working with what we have, with the idea of let's make it better and grow it. I think the higher density areas are a real opportunity, to come from that kind of mindset. Where we want to look at more conservation and things like that, those are a little bit different conversation, but in this area, it's kind of, this is where you can look to incentivize like crazy.
I think it also I wrote down figuring out, 4.2% is it our revenue is commercial right now of our entire, and what is a healthy ratio?
That's a really good
And
point.
then what does that look like to actually
Well,
figuring,
yeah,
go ahead. I know we have some of those data points.
I think Stephanie was trying to ballpark that, if
Yeah.
we need to make that, yes, a much bigger number than 4 or 5%. How many businesses is that, and rough,
What
if it's
What kind of
5
land use?
Melanzonas and 10 Family Dollars and 20 Saturdays, not advocating for that, just tax revenue wise, what kind of plots do we need? And do we have that?
Right,
Right,
right.
'cause I think that's one of the motivations for starting this discussion was we don't have as much land either for residential or for commercial industrial as we think we do. So, but we don't we don't really know the answer to that yet, right? We don't know how much more we need than is currently available.
Right.
Double or 10 times.
And thinking, business zoning is, it's got that mixed, it can do residential, it can do commercial, it can do, business is your
Oh, yeah,
biggest
right.
opportunity, or that it has the most allowed uses by right, and conditional uses are gonna find in business. And that's the green on there, so, there's a limited and interesting maybe to see where it's located too. That's what the trailer parks are, for whatever reason. Maybe soon to be different down south, if they're talking about a PUD down south, I can say that much without it causing any stir, or not ex parte, there's no application, we're just talking.
Just type that.
We're just talking. So, yeah, it's kind of an exciting conversation. And when you say, Stephanie, so that this is EDC work that's being done? No?
No, I think part of the work that Stephanie McBride was doing on helping us do like
Oh.
long-term revenue projections, or I think scenarios is a better word than projection.
Okay.
Like out through mine closure.
Okay,
So like
looking at
understanding
diversification of the
where-
economies,
the-
kind
yeah.
of thing.
Well, and also understanding like with different, like sort of high-low scenarios of mine tax revenue,
Tax revenues.
what's our total,
Specific
and
to
different
tax
scenarios of residential and other property growth. Just playing around with those numbers and trying to see
Awesome.
how do we have a calmer glide path to mine closure?
Well, and
And how much can we spend per year on stuff other than core operation? Like on housing or
Right.
whatever,
right, no, that's great, and also, like, I think highlights that thought of bringing economic development into this whole big picture conversation as
Yeah.
well. Because I
Yeah.
thought there was gonna be like some facilitated conversations with UDC on maybe looking at that and what type of business and
Mhm.
attracting.
I'm sure it'll
different
get there, but
kinds.
it's,
So,
yeah.
okay, but, does that resonate with everybody, that if we are successful in engagement with like, community builders, that we bring those lenses in
Mhm.
and combine all that as we
yeah.
look at this? Okay, so just rezone everything along those major roads business.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right?
I
And
mean,
like
yeah.
bump out,
Yeah.
yeah.
Problem solved. Done.
No, and in some magical future, like the EDC person would have like a list of like businesses that from a business perspective you think could succeed with our
Right.
workforce and business region, and they have this map when we're done, and their
Right.
job would be to help people
Fill all the gaps and-
like mesh those.
Exactly,
Mhm.
that's, how much developable area do they need for that, and then obviously the work on the industrial.
Yeah.
park will be-
Instead of them needing this crazy head knowledge of nuances and what's actually going on, the zoning
Right.
map could inform that.
Yes.
No, because, and not to go too far, but I imagine like some businesses really want to be on the road, like they're visible. So other
Yeah, some need
businesses
it, some
doesn't
don't
matter,
need it.
You
Yeah.
know,
Right, or like the periphery of expanding the commercial industrial and in the
Yeah.
IM, like where can we make some exceptions? We're not concerned
Yeah.
about people living on the land, like
Right.
all day, every day, and with those specific material, like hazardous material concerns.
Yeah.
Hey, Howard and Joey, we got kind of lost in the conversation in the room. I just put our camera back on, you guys. Do you have anything that you'd like to say and add in?
No, I just think that Grice has done a heck of a job getting all this put together. It's too bad we couldn't have had all of this years ago, but it's going to be an excellent tool. We'll also compliment Heather for all of the work she's done on this also. So that's my comments. I'd like to see how it all works out.
Thanks, Howard.
Thank you, Howard.
Yeah, you guys have done a good job with this. Bryce in particular, thank you. And Heather, thanks for your insights. But there are so many nuances. It's really hard to kind of know where to start. So it's up to you guys to pinpoint these areas that need to be rezoned, and then maybe I can catch up.
So let's just wrap up a little bit. Does that sound good about what our next steps are gonna be? We're gonna create a map that we're just gonna do from 36 to 17. And then we're gonna send out to the planning commission and the board. Bryce, Heather, and I will meet again, like we did before this meeting. And we'll just give you kind of some direction and maybe some different, like the email that I sent out, just ask a couple different questions to just kind of, so that we can start our next conversation in 2 weeks of, but we're gonna really focus on that area and bring forth some questions about knowing that these are areas that we wanna incentivize higher densities. Do we all agree that that's our goal? And so what would that look like if we worked through a plan that would incentivize density in that area?
Kind of for
17, or 36 to 17, I'm sorry,
North
36.
Boulevard to
So yeah, the Boulevard Road up to Mountain View Drive.
And then can we just bound it from city limits to the railroad?
Yep,
Yes.
yep, I like it. Yep.
Yes. And then east to west would be, city limits and.
Yeah,
And then we'll do railroad another day, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and I do think that east side strip would be interesting to tackle,
At some point, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it stands out like a sore thumb when you look at
Right.
it this way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm. But a lot of it, when you
But-
do put on the residential,
As far as,
like things that are already built.
oh, yeah. No,
Oh, right.
most, everything besides the Leadville 7 parcel.
Yeah, I know, I was just gonna say, I think almost all of this already. I'm sorry, I have to go, but I loved this conversation and,
Yeah, thank you, guys. I felt like that's exactly what we wanted, was to start out kind of broad and figure out a way to narrow our discussion for the next step.
yeah, and maybe we'll do that and decide that we have to do it totally different, who knows, but let's start there and see what happens.
Great.
I feel like if and when we get to that section 36 to 24,
Yeah.
that adds a whole lot of
Oh, yeah.
interesting perimeters and boundaries on
Yes.
now
So many
finally getting
things.
to like, okay, we don't want to expand develop, like residential. That was another layer, I wonder, on like existing permitted areas for mining. So we have existing and what those areas are,
Okay,
right? Like,
yeah, I can add that, just to.
Well,
elaborate on this, 'cause
and
this
honestly,
covers it kind of.
The IM, if we can make that like dark brown, because it almost just seems like there's not a layer on it.
oh yeah.
Do you want me
that
to make
gray.
the entire IM zone dark brown, including the areas that might be considered for rezone or analyzed a little closer? Do you want me to draw a line here so we can look at everything?
What about, can you
Maybe
put
we'll
the
like have
color
IM
under the
area.
parcel? Can you
Sorry.
put the color under the parcel layer? So it's not the color on top of the parcel layer
Yes.
for the IM?
Oh, yeah.
I
You
don't
want
know.
the parcels on top of the brown?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Cause then it's,
Mhm.
we can
So you
still,
can still see it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I almost want to keep the east side IM in the non-developable layer for now, and then have that be our later,
Once we got in the root.
or maybe it's when we start talking about that area right there, but
Yeah.
I just feel like for now, it's easier to know.
I think
To
the
just have it
water and
blocked.
sewer gravity line, we need that before we can start
Identifying if
getting
that can
clever
be,
with the
yeah,
IM
Yeah.
overlay.
Okay.
agreed.
and then thinking about like, are there any commercial businesses that are worth incentivizing that might not need water and sewer?
Mhm. Well, and I've thought about that before, like with the industrial park, if there was incentives to get some of the businesses that maybe don't belong downtown to relocate to a place that makes more sense.
Contractor
So just
trade
those kinds of
shops.
things, yeah.
Well, I mean, you know,
They're all
some
things at
repair
some
things
point.
need water and sanitation, but contractor trade shops, I mean, storage kind of things can be nicely moved out of the gateway corridors, so.
But they're
But
so
then-
pretty.
But then what, and also what revenue do they actually generate? Like, there's the use, but then the actual return on the investment to the community, what revenue is that generating?
It depends on which ones we're talking about,
Right,
but a lot of them
right.
probably do, auxiliary.
Like, does a storage facility unit actually generate a lot of revenue, or?
Oh,
take
you
up
mean
a lot of
like a
space?
mini storage, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I have to
Yeah,
get-
yeah, I was thinking, yeah.
Right.
Somebody else will have to adjourn us.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heather.
Thanks, Heather.
You mentioned the local transit, but also just, I mean, as we start looking at some of these areas, that there is we have the 2 CDOT grants, like, so the local transit planning, but then also the, like, traffic
Controlling,
controlling stuff that, you know, again, just might help. So we get into some parcels, we can help fix some stuff or make some areas better or worse for some uses.
access.
Yeah, I'd love to see if you have data, or I can just create it based on the map, that buffer around the bus route.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's not just the bus stops and the bus route, it's expanded out to a whole
3/4
corridor.
Yeah,
mile.
Kayla probably has the base map for that. I have like a PowerPoint presentation with it, but that won't.
The actual
It's a
transportation.
3/4, yeah, maybe, Fair and Pierce has that basically.
Yeah.
But it's a 3/4 mile
Okay.
call from that line, that
Yeah.
route. that
From
fixture.
Mount-
Quarter mile wide, so.
Yes,
Yeah.
okay, just
Got it.
measured out.
Is that 3/8 on each side or 3/4 on each side?
Right, I think they're saying 3/8 on each side, so, cool.
It might be 3/4 on each side. It's pretty wide swath.
Okay.
It's 3/4 of a mile
On each, from the
the
center.
center
Oh,
of
okay,
the route,
okay,
I
got it.
think.
So a mile and a
Yeah.
half
You can
wide,
call out.
Yeah.
okay,
That would cover the whole town.
yeah, that's
It-
expansive.
It about
Well,
does.
and that, I think because we got into that, there is like some of, when you put that on the map, like it covers some places that like don't have roads, you know, so you can't get the bus to go somewhere that isn't, the bus shouldn't go.
Right.
So, you know, because 3/4 of a mile from CMC gets you into some places a bus shouldn't go.
Right.
3/4 of a mile from Mountain View, like, gets you to some very inaccessible places.
Right.
Yeah, but it also gets you to, you know, Grand West parcels, so it makes those viable,
Yeah,
or just nicer. But yeah, I would love to have that data and add that in, and just as a visual, like,
yeah,
more infrastructure.
but it also might help, like, that work might help with some, like, trying to see if there's anything still to do with, like, you know, the Taco Bell, Safeway, like, while, you know, getting into that area.
For
with some better
stops and-
traffic planning, well, stops, but also the
Oh, you mean
like
for them,
access
yes.
roads.
Traffic planning in there, yes.
Just, yeah, it's not very
Yeah.
clear on here, but.
Or like,
sure that-
Fritz's property,
Oh, yeah, down south.
yeah,
Yeah.
because
yeah,
it's
just
the
a shape out for
it's
that,
the
for the
CMC,
line shape out for the route
Fritz,
and
Forest
calling it
Service,
Right.
sanitation, dump station,
Sanitation.
that intersection is in the
Okay.
planning too. Sheriff wants a traffic circle.
Is there gonna be parking lots along this bus route to kind of alleviate some of the parking difficulties?
I think park and ride at the connection to the regional bus routes to Eagle and Summit. But not, I mean, I think the idea is the local transit means you don't need a car, so it will go from where people live to where they need to get to work, or,
Destinations.
you know, the hospital or CMC.
Would that service the race people on these weekends?
So you mean more of
I
like a
would
tourist park and ride down, yeah, we've heard like that park and ride idea downtown
Yeah.
too, and
They're also doing their own shuttling now.
they
Yeah.
are doing a lot of shuttling.
Yeah, so
I mean,
Should we?
definitely the design to date is very much local resident need focused, like get people from outlying neighborhoods able to access the core city services, Safeway, DMV, hospital.
Instead of walking along Mountain View.
Yeah. Or biking up and down 24, or having like everyone in the household have to have a car, whether they're licensed or not.
It all sounds very good.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a little while.
I forgot what month it was, but he said that like there was a month where a third of their traffic stops were not licensed drivers,
Wow.
most underage.
Really?
Well, I mean, I got a new appreciation for OHVs just hanging out at my friend's house that borders the Mineral Belt Trail.
Oh,
It is just all night, just,
Constantly.
yeah,
wow.
yeah.
It's another-
Anyway, sorry, getting
Yeah,
far
yeah, I
field.
know.
I think someone needs to adjourn us.
Yes. Howard, could you give us a motion for adjournment?
I would be glad to do that. I make
And
the
Joe-
motion that we
Give me a
adjourn
second.
this work session.
I will second that motion.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thank you, Howard, thank you, Jody.
We'll send you, and we'll make sure that you have the handout that we gave out tonight. And we'll make sure that you get this map bumped up in your inbox. Thank you.
Good night, folks.
Thank
Good
you,
night, Chris.
Chris.